And we're live. Iman, are you excited to discuss another food delivery startup?
We're talking hard tech today. We're talking, I don't want to say real tech, but we're talking stuff that is genuinely difficult to do. So hat tip before we've even started.
Now, go ahead. I'll be the one to say it. This is amidst all of the food delivery startups and whatever startups you're seeing out there these days. As you guys know, me and Iman have been bringing on less guests. We've been doing more rational musings episodes, which is just me and Iman chopping up what's happening in tech. But we do occasionally bring on the elite guest in our view, and probably should be your view as well. People working on real technology, real problems, deep tech, more specifically today, space tech. And guest is none other than Will Bruey from Varda Space Industries. Will, what's up?
Hey, Cyrus, thanks for having me, and I am certainly flattered. I hope that Space Factories can fit into your rational VC title here.
For sure. So we know that before Varda, you did a bunch of things, one of which a chunk of your career was SpaceX from sort of the early days, you can say, kind of. What was the most important thing you learned at SpaceX? What led to that? What did you learn? What was that whole experience like, the number of years you spent there? Because you worked on a lot of cool stuff over there.
Yeah, the thing I learned the most. I guess I should preface by saying that the vast majority of the engineering lessons I've learned from there. So it's really too much to count. But to boil it all down, I would say always being able to find a way to make progress in what appears to be a roadblock, whether it's go around it, find a way through it, what would be the next best alternative to going to the original path. And it's just like find a way or make one in an engineering sense would be the key takeaway if I had to sum it up in a sentence.
And talk to us about how that mentality or what you learned there has kind of helped you as you've progressed through your career.
Yeah, the mentality towards that approach. So I had a couple of great mentors at SpaceX. One of my direct managers would always, kind of guide towards figuring out, that philosophy, if you will, of finding a way or make one in a lighthearted and humorous approach. So kind of one almost like a singing in the lifeboats situation. And so taking that kind of mentality and applying it to a rigorous work ethic was a great takeaway, I think.
And quite interestingly, after you kind of had that stint at SpaceX, your story is one that is not necessarily what we'd see in this space. Cyrus and I are both from finance backgrounds. So
okay.
We both have felt the pain that maybe you went through, but we felt it in the reverse order. So talk to me about what happened after SpaceX.
Sure. Yeah. So I felt like I had kind of done the majority of the impact I could make at SpaceX, in the sense that the next big milestone was Mars in my mind. So the question I asked myself was, do I stay and devote my entire career to boots on the ground, or do I, poke my head out and see what else this planet has to offer? So I went with the latter, and it kind of, at that time, I was thinking about some of these things. The reason I went to finance was kind of a holistic set of reasons. One is I've always been fascinated by business. I forced my family to play Monopoly during game night, and we have a ton of fun playing. But I think that I'm always the only one who wants to keep playing at the end. So I figured that, plus my family is on the East Coast. So I've spent a few years there. Always wanted to live in Manhattan for at least a brief stint, and learn the aspects of business as well. And so my boss over at Bank of America, we actually met. I was giving him a tour of SpaceX, and so he was telling me about how in the finance world, there's basically two ways to get promoted. You can either go leadership route, or excuse me, in the tech world, you can get leadership route or kind of principal engineer route. But in the finance world, it's mostly leadership. And so they didn't have that many engineers at kind of the senior level that have done hard tech, hard engineering in the recent past. And so kind of having an evangelist, if you will, for new tech and this kind of first principles thinking, he certainly subscribed to a lot of the mental models that Elon did, and so he's like, I want you to bring kind of that to the finance world. And so that was like, oh, this is perfect as far as in line with what I'm interested in, and an impactful opportunity.
Awesome. So just very quickly, so your undergrad was at Cornell, engineering physics, applied physics, Masters of Engineering at Cornell, systems engineering. You were an electrical engineer for a few years, and then you joined SpaceX 2012 as a lead hardware development engineer, and then a spacecraft operator systems officer. So you left in 2018, which is what we just discussed, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Director of Global Equities Technology. And then, like any wise person, I'm assuming, I'm not speaking for you, I'm assuming you got sick of finance for valid reasons. And December 2020, you were appointed as CEO of Varda Space Industries. How did you get to know the Varda founders, and how did you become CEO through this journey of a career you've had?
Sure. Yeah. So I actually I am one of the founders. So I'm a co-founder of the three. Delian over at Founders Fund approached me. He wanted to do an incubation for manufacturing unique products in space, and through his network and my network's overlap, we connected. And I wasn't actually too fed up with finance, in the sense that I still really was enjoying it, but I knew I always wanted to do a startup. And so eventually, and so I was basically trying to find the least bad idea that would meet the activation energy required to quit my job and go for it. So I was close to that, and Delian called me up and was like, wait, I got a better idea than the least bad ideas you have. And so and I was like, wow, so we kind of did the diligence over it, or did the diligence for it over the course of a couple months. And when everything started to pencil out, we also linked up with our third co-founder, Daniel, who actually, I think he reached out to Daniel first, who is kind of specializing in one of our first products. So between the three of us, we figured his ability to raise capital, Daniel's experience with this specific material in zero G before, and my willingness to rock and roll as the CEO was kind of something worth really throwing the life effort behind, if you will.
That's a great story for how you got to where you are. What's really interesting is earlier on you said that you went from working on shifting focus towards potentially going to Mars, thinking that wasn't the right thing, and therefore coming back down to Earth. But you've ended up somewhere in the middle, right?
Exactly.
So best of both worlds.
Oh, that's funny. That's a great saying. Yeah.
Talk to us about Varda. What is Varda, and what's the mission?
Yeah, so the mission statement is to expand the economic bounds of humankind, and the thesis behind that is that we've reached a time when the commoditization of space hardware and space capability is at a maturity such that we can build business on top of it. And so that's really the fundamental thesis of the company. And where that comes from is the fact that 10 years ago, when we were at SpaceX, we would schlep around the world and build our own ground stations. But you can now do that as AWS offers ground stations as a service, a click away. There's a whole suite of space startups that have commoditized hardware that we can purchase and build our systems from. So it's it's nice to be in that layer of abstraction above. And then in addition to that, from a first principles perspective, if all of engineering is built on the four fundamental laws of physics, gravity, electromagnetism, strong and weak nuclear forces, and we have the ability to now manufacture with affecting gravity as a significant process, there's a lot of innovation on top of that to be had, and a lot of it's already being researched on the International Space Station. So our first list of products have already kind of been vetted for us. So we have the R&D department came before us, and so between that environment of commoditization and low launch costs, in addition with this obvious first principles value add, a new capability to manufacturing that you can now essentially have a gravity off switch for your process. It seemed like after Delian gave me the idea, I was like, "Gee, I'm embarrassed. I didn't think of that. That seems pretty obvious now." So there's one other place I was going to go with that as far as what is Varda? So it's basically tying those two aspects together in the mentality of the engineering that I know and love.
So for those listening, some may not have a deep technical background. Why is, if you can, and I love your reference to first principles thinking, because that's literally plastered all over our website. But why is in-space manufacturing important? What are some of the most pressing issues that Varda is working to solve?
Mm-hmm. The most pressing issue, I would say, as far from a product perspective, I think is pharmaceuticals. There's also other products and materials, fiber optics, and why they're pressing is that there's this whole world of capability that we can offer by having a process service, if you will, where you can turn off gravity. And so I know it's a little bit in the abstract. So let me use a more real world example for a second. Let's say when NMR or MRI machines first came out, before being used with humans, they would also be used for evaluating other organic tissue, and are still used to this today as a test facility. And so what they'd offer is the capability to look inside organic matter, which is a fundamental capability that you can build a whole host of applications on top of. And in a similar way, being able to offer a volume for long-term exposure to microgravity allows for unique chemistry on top of that. So the pressing issues, I guess, specifically are, it's always tough to answer that question in deep tech because there's no market for something that doesn't exist yet. But so that I wouldn't say there's any hair on fire problems, if you will, that what this will do is allow us that capability to provide solutions in a relatively large innovation space.
That's really interesting. Why can't you do the same thing on Earth? Is it just the zero gravity element? And can you not build something that replicates that on Earth?
Correct. You can't for an indefinite period of time. So in order to simulate free fall, you have to be either falling. So the best we can do really on Earth is if you go into a plane and do parabolas. And while you're in the top arc of the parabola, you'll feel weightless. But eventually you got to come down. And so if you want, that's not super great for a manufacturing process and being scalable. And of course, every time you throw a football or a baseball or anything, it experiences free fall for that amount of time. But there is just no way, unless Einstein was wrong, there is no way to simulate that for an indefinite amount of time on Earth. And so we have to go to space for that. And what's really cool too is going along that line is that it's a unique capability that has science behind it that's already been researched. But what's also neat about it is that it's kind of the obvious next step from a drop and launch cost perspective. So if you take the space industry in its static equilibrium state that it was in 10 years ago, and you drop the biggest cost by an order of magnitude by inventing reusable rockets, there should be some elasticity in the market. And so we are really excited about being the elasticity. And I think most of the folks who join us like really see that in order to make, everyone here is obviously passionate about engineering and space, and in order to really solidify rapid reusable rockets as a thing that lasts indefinitely for society, like airplanes do, you have to create and drive the demand. And so this, lots of what's being launched into space today is either telecom or Earth observation. And those assets, once they get up there, they stay up there. So at Varda, we kind of have a blessing and a curse. The curse is we have to continue to launch in order to produce revenue because we need to bring those products down. But the blessing is that we drive, if successful, of course, we'll drive global launch cadence in the process and really solidify the demand for those regular trips to space on even a daily basis.
Right. Okay. Well, going back to just one of the things you mentioned, which was the people joining Varda, and I've done some light DD, you can say, and there is a lot of SpaceX veterans joining you. And before we got onto the pod, you mentioned, of course, you're in LA. Is there for anyone looking to build in this space, is there a talent shortage? And are most of the talented people coming out of companies like SpaceX? What has been your experience of forming this team, and where do the majority come from? Is it correct to say SpaceX?
So let's see. There is a large percentage. I don't know if it's over 50. I would say it's kind of in that neighborhood right now. But no, there is no talent shortage. We have it's hard to engineer in space, but there are a few benefits. The first is that the phrase I like to use is there's a perennial snowfall of excited kids graduating from great universities who want to do ambitious stuff in space. And so we have a little bit of a talent arbitrage in our favor in the space industry, in the sense that there is always a new inbound excited talent. And that kind of has been doubled down as well in the last decade or so with, as you kind of all the commercial space activity that's been taking place. And so with those two combined forces, building a team to take on this relatively pragmatic but still exciting challenge it has been easier than I thought it was going to be.
And the things that these guys work on, right? So I don't want to get into the detail of what an average day looks like for an engineer at Varda, but what kind of things do you have to consider? What are the biggest pain points, challenges from a technical perspective that have really kind of made the talent what they are in terms of coming up with solutions, but also keep them, cracking at the problem?
Yeah, it's the toughest, the unique aspect about it is that there are no questions in the homework textbook. And what I mean by that is lots of engineers can solve problems, but to be able to define the problems as well in the beginning and then also solve them is something that in a lot of deep tech, and especially in aerospace engineering, is something where you get a lot of bruises on the way, and you learn how to do that. And so the folks here have definitely been down the path of having to define the problems in a complete vacuum with no safety net, if you will, from, like sometimes whenever we're interviewing someone, sometimes they'll come in and say, the first thing I would do is allocate the requirements. And I'm like, from where? Is there a mailbox I'm not aware of? I would love to get in on that. So yeah, I think that, and having and in aerospace and spacecraft engineering and rocket engineering in general, there are lots of times when the solution you need to solve, you aren't yourself sure if there is even a solution. So this doesn't happen too often in my career, but there have been times at SpaceX where I'm like, I actually don't know if I can get this engineering solution to close, and I reveled in that feeling but whenever it would happen, and I do remember when I was making the change to to start Varda and leave the finance world, I was like, oh, I'm excited to have that feeling again. I was like, do you want to have that feeling indefinitely for up to a decade? And I was like, yeah, sure. That was the most fun I've ever had, is when you don't know, but you're going to give it your all, and when you do, it feels really good to succeed.
For sure. I wish we had more of that mentality in the UK. There's a lot less of that, but hey. So you guys will be the first commercial re-entry vehicle to land on land and not water. Firstly, why land? And secondly, are you building these rockets? What's the process?
No, we aren't building the rockets. We will launch on a rideshare mission, and that's actually that's a great question, because that's part of the company thesis, where that commoditization layer of who's come before us doing space hardware and building that layer of abstraction, launch is included in that. So we always used to say it at SpaceX back in the day before, at first, okay, so this is a little bit crude, but it's an Elon quote, so I'll blame him. He said that whenever, he's like, guys, I don't want to have it be every time we launch, I feel like I'm pooping a pineapple. And so we would always, our goal was to make launch boring and make it as boring as possible. It should, and so that's kind of the way we think about our company as well, is we want to make it so that when we're routinely bringing product back from space in a very similar kind of mental model, at least, to that MRI machine I suggest. It's just like, oh, it's a new capability. There's lots that you can do with it. We are self-sponsoring a few products at first to show the value there, and then go from there. But going back to your question, yeah, we won't be launching our assets, and why over land? Because for unit economics, if you imagine the humanity's first industrial park, it'll look like robotic assets in orbit being serviced by small autonomous capsules. It won't look quite as glorious as an Earth-based, I think it will be, but it won't look as vast, I should say, as a huge industrial park on Earth. But it will have routine operations, and it just, from first principles, again, it makes more sense to land over land because of the unit economics of the recovery operations, and so it has been done before in the government sector. And I think, if we're getting technical here, I guess you could consider some of Boeing re-entered, but they were paid by government funding to do that over land. So I think we're the first fully commercial, assuming we succeed next year.
Let's talk on that for a little bit. The financials that sit behind it. So what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong because I have no idea, but what I understand is that there's a payload cost per weight, so per kilogram of launch, right? And currently, you're like sky high in terms of, pardon the pun, but you're really high in terms of the cost of launch. So, right, you're going up to, I don't know, I'm making numbers up, like $1 million a launch, but you want to drop that. And I know that Elon's come out and said, there's a Starship for SpaceX that's planned to do it at $10. How does that economy of, like, I know it's going to be through some level of economies of scale, but how do you get from such a ridiculous launch number to come down so fast?
Yeah, the way to do it is, the first big one is reusability. That's the big swing. And so now that's happened, that's kind of dropped the launch costs to a level where the first products are now economically viable. And so that's what we're going to use, that have we're going to select for our first products that have the highest margins from $1 per kilogram perspective. And so that has now opened the door. But as those launch costs come down, then that opens the door for more and more products that would be able to have the value capture be worth the trip to space and back. And then as far as how that happens from a technical perspective, the first one is reusability, and the second is economies of scale from a more simplistic less of a step function like reusability and more of a gigafactory mental model, if you will.
Cool. So shifting gears, Will, to space in general, and more pressing questions probably for every 8-year-old who's enthusiastic about space. What we're hearing a lot about space in the last few years. Why is space being presented as the next frontier? And sort of more deep, we can go into deeper questions. Do you expect to see humans live beyond this planet in our lifetimes? As in, when will space be available to the masses, and why is commercial space travel necessary to even begin with?
Yeah, so I do think we will see in our lifetime. You guys seem about the same age, so I think I can. But I do think it'll be in our lifetime that we'll see humans live indeterminately in space, but not their entire lives in space. That might be for the next generation. I do think that we'll see boots on the ground on Mars, and potentially a habitat before all three of us pass away that have have people living there indefinitely. But as far as kind of the masses, I think that'll be a generation or so from us. But that is actually kind of another part of why we're kind of excited about Varda as well, is that I'd say like the stopgap solution to making space accessible to the excited 18-year-old engineers, is that what the phrase you used, is by bringing the value of space, in our case microgravity, to the masses. So it's kind of like the opposite value prop of taking humans to space. It's kind of bringing space to Earth. And so what that kind of looks like is I always kid around with the team. Is I say, we'll know we're successful when we can go into the desert where there's where we'll be landing our operations, and we can go camping, and every hour we can see the shooting star of the reentry capsule coming in with more product from our industrial park. So starting from the beginning of your question, the frontier aspect, I guess it's the next frontier because there isn't any more on Earth, so we're just forced to expand. And why is that important? I would say from it is certainly hard to say. There's definitely I'll take the altruistic answer and then the pragmatic answer. The altruistic answer is that it's just too exciting not to. Once you, as long as you're not at the very base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you want to explore and you're curious about things. And so I think that even more than what's the pragmatic purpose? Like really the most fundamental answer, that the most pragmatic purpose for a lot of folks is purpose itself, almost, is to expand, to be curious about the rest of the universe, and it's almost in our DNA. So let's take a more pragmatic answer to your question. There is value in that exploration almost as a byproduct of satisfying that human need, in the same way that any other folks would explore outside of their cave 5,000 years ago. We don't know, but we know that when we take a couple steps, we find some value there, and we take a couple more steps, we find a little bit more value, and we can kind of see the more we expand, the more value there is to be had in those expanding concentric circles. And we kind of, to steal a quote from one of the Varda teammates, we kind of have to see those pieces of value, capture them, kind of, and then leave the breadcrumbs behind for the rest of society who might not be as much of a believer in the potential of just expanding those concentric circles, and bootstrap them along with us, using the economic value as the driver there.
And beyond the private markets that help commercialize space, both in terms of manufacturing up in space, but also in terms of travel and kind of living in space, really. Beyond all of that, you have to engage with the public sector at some level, right? You can't go into space and not consult NASA. But the point I'm trying to get to is, how do you engage with the public sector? Like, what do you guys do with the public sector? How involved are you? And is it a hairy situation? Is it difficult?
Not only is the economics aspect easier now because of a new layer of commoditization, but the regulatory aspects are as well. And for example, I'll just give you a quick example. The FAA, regulates all the airspace in America, and they, 10 years ago, they didn't have what we call now Part 450. So Part 450 of their regulation defines launch and reentry for commercial spacecraft and commercial rockets. And so now we have a framework to work within, whereas those who came before Varda had to essentially define that and work with regulators to build that framework. And I feel almost guilty at some level, where it's like, oh, we just get to walk on through the hallway that you guys built for us. Thanks a lot. This was a lot easier than the construction aspect.
But that's part of the concentric circle story, isn't it? It's the breadcrumbs. Public sector left it first. You guys are picking it up. There'll be more picking it up later.
Exactly. Yep. The FAA. There's several regulatory agencies that we have to work with, and the means by which we do so is lots of them will actually form teams around us. The FAA being one of them. The FCC we work with, and the implementation of that is we'll do our designs, we'll propose them to them, we'll get any feedback, we'll be like, hey, this is what we want to do. Have we met, it looks like we're meeting the intent of the regulation. Here there is no regulation defined because it's a little unique, but we think we meet what you want. And there's some of that. And then they, every once in a while, we'll have checkpoints. And so we're actually having one next week, review our the whole smash, and we gather feedback and tear into each other's designs and make sure we're good at that checkpoint. And then we can go to the next stage. But it can get hairy at times, for sure.
Cool. Will, so you are a man of rationality and logic, and there are many people who, what you've done in the last few minutes is a great pitch, even though you're not trying to pitch. It's a great pitch to get people like me to leave behind the world of SaaS and fintech and software and whatever. Tell us about operating hard tech, deep tech. What does a typical day look like for you? And I know you're probably going to hate that question because there probably is no typical day for you. Yeah, just walk us through that, because a lot of people, they're thinking of, I want to work on more pressing things, but they might not have the guts to do it,
It's funny you say that, because if you'd like to move to the West Coast, we would love to have you at Varda for sure. You guys seem like you have great attitudes and curiosity, and those are again back to the first principles. But if not, maybe definitely a tour sometime. But as far as the day-to-day goes, and what it's like to operate a company like this, it's kind of a little bit of a people first approach, in the sense of, at the very fundamentals, we're building a team, and I do subscribe to that philosophy of, you're building a team first and a company second. And I make sure, so a few things I tell the team is like, make sure, and notify me if this is not the case immediately, but make sure that we have a place where you can be the absolute best engineering version of yourselves when you're here. And I want this company to have the fingerprints of those who are involved. I don't have quite as much clout as some other aerospace company leaders, and so I can't compete on those dimensions. And so I'm forced into a different leadership style. And so the day-to-day is really making sure that the rest of the team is at their full capacity and capability and have those opportunities. And then making sure that we kind of project those goals onto the space of practical implementation. And so going along with that is like when I'll tell folks that we're hiring is make this the place where you can paint the Sistine Chapel of your career. Like you've been educated, you've gotten the bruises and the beat up in the workforce, and now you are ready to like do the most epic thing that you can do, and let's take a big swing together on it. And so I don't know if you guys have ever seen that movie, Saving Private Ryan, but there's this one army soldier who like every battlefield he's on, he's the one who knows the situation, and he collects the dirt into the little tin cans, and it's like that's kind of what the team mentality culture is like. We've been in the Vibe Lab at 2 a.m. trying to qual our hardware while the rocket's on the pad and being like, man, I really hope this passes the test, otherwise we got to call it's going to be my so like with that. With those experiences, is kind of like remembering those things and knowing the teams going through those day to day and making sure that the company is operating in a sense that allows them to succeed in those environments is kind of the day to day for me from a low level like how do we strictly operate on day to day from like step-by-step process. Our COO, John Barr, executes there and kind of runs the shop day to day. But what it looks like for me and is you get up pretty early in the morning, thanks to you guys in this case. No,
sorry.
No, I'm just kidding. I was awake anyway. And then get to the office, figure out what the top 3 priorities of the day are, and hope that they're the same ones that you went to sleep thinking they would be the night before, and getting those decisions made and making sure that while you're making those decisions, or while I'm making those decisions, make sure that the rest of the environment is in the state that I described earlier.
You say that you want to create an environment where the employees create their own Sistine Chapels of their essentially their professional lives. How do you ensure that the people you hire can be molded into Michelangelos? How do you know that? How do you know? Because I'm sure we've spoken about the youngsters who are super interested in space. A lot of people kind of either fall off it because it's too crazy a concept to think about how do I do stuff in space instead of moving into something more Earth related and understandable. But for those that are interested in this field, like, what should they focus on in their early years? And then what do you look for that would kind of bridge that gap?
The thing I would look for is, I guess the answer to the first part of the questions is I don't know, and that's why we have a pretty rigorous interview process. But part of that is finding out how do I know, and there's a lot of questions I can ask, and looking for very specific kind of nuances that show if someone would thrive in this environment or not, right? And of course, if not, that's not a bad thing. It just means, different strokes for different folks. And so, yeah, rigorous interview process, but how if someone would be interested in joining Varda, how would they? The answer to that would be first principles physics. And so, yeah, a good plug for your website as well. It seems like a common theme, the way you guys think as well. And using that as kind of the foundation to build the mental models. And while you're building those mental models and that pragmatism of, okay, well, how are these first principles applied in the world today and why? And then actually going and doing it just from like a muscle memory almost perspective. That combination has been pretty successful for the folks that we've hired thus far. There was another interesting part of your question. Yes. So the way that I've that I also kind of try and figure out if an engineer might be successful at Varda, an environment like Varda, is kind of Socratic questioning, and if the person thrives in a mode of Socratic questioning and kind of resonates with that way of thinking. And then on top of that, if, hey, have you also built something? Make sure that the first principles are there, the mode of thinking is there, and then have you actually, what have you built and how did that go, and that sort of thing. And those are kind of the three kind of tiers there.
So we know that you guys were incubated in Founders Fund, but in total, if I'm not mistaken, you've raised 9 million from Founders Fund, Lux Capital, Naval Ravikant, among other investors. And I feel as if deep tech is often misunderstood by most VCs, especially because of the, unlike SaaS, where they're just looking at instantly how quickly you can get profitable, or your customer contracts, retention, how sticky they are, whatever. This is completely different. So it is misunderstood. What advice do you have for founders and future founders trying to raise in this field? And do you feel that there are more VCs getting a deeper understanding of the field, and the future of the funding within the field will be brighter and better than it has been?
So yeah, I do think that VCs have, well, I guess the short answer is I haven't lived long enough or been in the field to give an educated answer there, but I'll take a swing. So just take this with a grain of salt. I think that from what I've gathered over, so I've been doing startup and VC stuff for about 6 years now, so I don't have a huge trend line, but the small trend that I've seen locally is VCs kind of understand how to think about abstract thought and capability of a business as in addition to how they could already think about, the typical 0 to 1 aspects, unit economics aspects, scales, what value can you capture, and what or can you create, and then what percentage of that value can you capture. So those are all the fundamentals, no doubt. But if you also layer in on top of that an ability to kind of have an additional layer of abstract thought from a capability perspective, I think that also is a small trend I've seen in VC tech in the past 6 years. Okay, so the advice for future founders. Sorry, that was the part that I forgot. The advice I would have is dumb ideas that I've tried in the past is too embarrassing to list on this public podcast. The amount of money I've spent on ideas, which I knew would probably not work, but was easily rationalized because of the education that I would get as intangible value in certainty, has paid off from an education perspective. So don't be afraid to try dumb ideas if you think there's something there, because you're going to find out why it's dumb, and that's a lesson learned right there. And also, don't be afraid to expend as many of your, let me put it this way: there is a arbitrage in culture right now for wasting personal resources in exchange for education, and there is value to be captured by spending personal resources on education that I don't think society completely capitalizes on.
Will, for someone who's running essentially a ridiculous space company, you've also got something you do on the side. I'm not sure to what extent it is on the side, and you've mentioned VC a little bit. You're very humble given the amount you're getting done. You also you also are at Also Capital. Do you want to talk us through what that is and how that kind of leans into your sort of startup life as well?
Yeah, I like the on the website it says learning, support, mentorship, ... Also Capital.
Just it's as well.
Also Capital. It's a great name, and it mentions we invest at the people stage. Going off of Iman's question, and also what is the people stage?
Yeah, the Aman, you couldn't have asked a better question because it kind of follows up to the previous one, which is this entire the entirety of Also Capital was a dumb idea that I wanted to pursue, and in the means of education. How it started was essentially my partner in it, Michael Annunziata. He and I, it started as an email chain back and forth, looking at cool pitch decks for startups, and just to pass the, as a fun hobby, we would talk about business models because it was fascinating to us. And, two people on the email chain turned into three, turned into four. And then, a couple of them looked really cool. And so we thought, hey, we should invest in this company. We think this is a good idea. Let's do the diligence. And I'll get into a funny story there in a second. But the takeaway was, the way I looked at it was as an alternative to an MBA. I'll probably spend just as much money as I would on an MBA. And so what do you get from an MBA? You get, professional. I see you clap. Okay. So yeah. So what do you get? You get some coursework, no question. Can you find that coursework elsewhere in a free public forum? Maybe, probably. You also gain networking. And that sort of thing. So I thought, well, this seems like a more efficient way, starting a small venture firm than an MBA. And in this case, I might even get my money back, right? So,
don't hold your breath. Don't hold your breath. Both of them
I know, of course. So, but that's really what it was. It was super educational. When Founders Fund, when Delian reached out to me, I was able to, I knew what a safe was. I knew what a capped note was. I knew what how conversion worked. I knew what liquidity preference was. I knew how to do diligence on things, and that was just from a hobby where I was, from potentially another perspective, I was wasting time and money. Putting my personal capital into some of the more outrageous ideas in our portfolio right now. But it was a great education, and so that's really how it got started. But it's essentially the way I thought about it at the time too. Is it's kind of like we're playing Sandlot ball version of institutional venture firms, but we're still swinging a bat. We're still running around the bases. It's in the Sandlot. It's not in a major league stadium, but we're learning the same things. And so the Sandlot version of baseball still taught me how to play the game. And there's one other thing I wanted to mention there. What was it? While
you think of that, for our UK listeners, the analogy is essentially playing five-a-side football with your mates down Power League versus playing 11-a-side Premier League football.
Exactly. Thank you for the translation. So there was what was it? Yeah, so it just kind of that was one of the quote unquote dumb ideas that actually turned into something pretty cool. And so we have a pretty good list of portfolio companies and great relationships with our founders, and most of the mentorship that you mentioned on the website comes from Mike. He certainly I learned a lot from him, and he's co-founded a company called Farther Farms. And the reason we got into that email chain that I mentioned was because, we started it because we were basically so excited about his company that we just thriving that we wanted to look at more startups. But as far as what investing at the people stage means to us is, we think that so from a pragmatic perspective, we can't get into big hot deals that actually make economic sense because right off the bat, because those are saturated by the major leagues or the Premier League, and so we are essentially forced into investing at the people stage of when it's literally just the person and an idea and something that looks like unit economics that could work. And so I guess that leads back to the funny story I was going to tell, which is, we execute. I'm pretty self-deprecating with the Also Capital folks because because we kind of kid around that we were just an email chain making jokes. But we do try to apply the best that we can be from an investment sophistication perspective. And so the funny story is that I never really realized this until I was kind of a founder on the other side, but we would do due diligence on the companies, and we would take calls with the founders and stuff like that. And, and then after all that, we would rack our brains and email back and forth and talk on the phone if, like, should we invest in this company, and let's look at these and what's the thesis and how could it be invalidated. And we spent hours, days on all these specific small, very early startups. And then we put in a $40,000 check aggregated, or I think the biggest one we did until a couple years ago was only $200K aggregated from the group. And I'm thinking to myself now in retrospect, I was like, man, the amount of investors I speak to and the amount of questions they ask me, if these random kids took 4 hours of my time and then invested $40K, I would be like, all right, like, I love you guys, but holy crap, that was exhausting. And so, we never really realized, or at least I didn't realize, I think Mike probably knew, but that the founders were being very polite, I would say, to us.
Well, it's great for me and Iman to learn from that lesson, in that we put in low five-figure checks in startups, and I feel like sometimes you're being a burden when you're speaking to these companies. But and you are downplaying the portfolio, I think, because you're not downplaying it, but I think you guys have made some great investments, one of which is 8 Sleep, Matteo, who we've had on the podcast before.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
What are some of the portfolio companies that you guys have, or that you can speak about, that you're proud investors in?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess there's a few from an exit perspective. Actually, I think it's going through. We're having our first exit come up, and I think it's still in the process. So I better keep my mouth shut so I don't do anything stupid. But we're really excited about that. But so I'll pick another couple of them. One of them that's really interesting is Atola, which is a face care company that one of our first, actually, they ship you it's a personalized skincare company. They ship you a set of litmus paper. You touch it to your face, and then you take a picture of it with your phone, and of 3, they have 3 papers. One's for pH, one's for oil content, one's for moisture. They might even have more there now. I haven't. I've been a little bit too busy at Varda to keep up with the Also Capital stuff. But then they would take a picture of it, and that the app would send you a personalized serum, and it would be the photo that did the machine learning or the machine recognition of the litmus paper content. So it would know your skin composition just by taking a picture. So so I thought it was really neat because when we were doing the diligence, I was asking the founder about the tech side of things, and what was cool was that the litmus paper was produced by a European company that designed the litmus paper and the photo recognition as a service as a B2B product for dermatologists. And so they were essentially taking this tech that already existed and applying it in a B2C fashion. And so I remember calling out Mike, and I was like, hey, the hardest part's over. We should invest in this company. And so that's one that I think was really cool, because and it kind of has like echoes into Varda too, is that they're taking a commoditized thing and building upon it. But yeah, there's a lot of cool of them in there. I like 8 Sleep. So of course I sleep on an 8 Sleep. I shamelessly plug the I hate how VC investors are just so shameless about plugging their portfolio companies.
Don't listen to any of our previous episodes, man. If that so stresses you out.
But then I do the exact same thing. I drink. We invested in a cider company. the cider's in the Varda fridge. We invested in 8 Sleep. I sleep on the 8 Sleep. So it's so yeah, I've the cat's the cat's out of the bag there. I do it as seamlessly as well.
Your personality has come out a lot in this call. So thank you for being so open, and thank you for being so chill. Like it's good to have people on who are like yourself, very easy to talk to and to probe on things. To finish off, no worries. To finish off, I want to pick up on a tweet that Delian had about you that just cracked us up when we were doing a little bit of DD in the background. Basically, I'm not going to read out the tweet. We'll put it up if you're watching on YouTube. But Delian basically trolls you about the fact that you literally fly. So there's a picture of you called tagged the man and his machine, and it's like one of these like small one-person plane things.
Yeah.
Are you a pilot? And like this is it's mind blowing. You don't see founders who are like this. So talk to us about that.
Sure. I am a pilot. I became one when I graduated. So when I graduated and went to SpaceX, I didn't know I joined SpaceX not with anyone. So I mean, all my friends eventually came from SpaceX, but for that brief moment, I had no social life, and for the first time in my life, also had disposable income. And I was like, well, if I'm going to do it, now's the time. So became a pilot. Something I always kind of wanted to do. And then when I left from, I flew for about 6 years renting, and then moved into a lease group with some other SpaceX pilots. And then when I moved from engineering to finance, I was like, well, if I'm going to sell my soul, I might as well get something for it. So, but I did, it certainly didn't have enough to buy like a private jet or anything, but I could buy an experimental plane, which is essentially, in America, the FAA basically classifies planes into 2 groups. One that's FAA certified, and they're like, this is going to fly and will work. And then experimental, which is like, you can do whatever you want. Bring the shoe screwing, bring the bubble gum. And so so this particular plane is, the other reason I wanted to get it was, it's experimental in the sense that it's not FAA approved, but it's approved to fly, of course, under experimental rules, but it's not quote unquote certified to that level of safety. And I thought, well, what's neat about this plane is that I can afford it, and it's the fastest thing I can afford, and I couldn't afford anything as fast or could hold as much. It's only a 4-seater. It could hold as much weight in the certified realm. And I thought, well, if I'm going to, I still self-identify as an engineer. And if I'm going into finance, I better be able to prove that I can still an engineer by owning and operating an experimental plane and doing all the maintenance work on it myself. And I bet my life that thing will work. So if anyone questions me while I'm on Wall Street, if I'm still an engineer, I will just fly that thing around their house.
Respect.
I'm sure the bankers are usually shocked because they have no skin in the game in any aspect of life, and they have a guy here with maximum skin in the game in every sense. Anyway, you're also a PADI open water diver. Do you ever fly the plane, parachute out the plane into water?
I would love to do that someday. So actually, funny thing about scuba diving is the only reason I got it was because I wanted to apply to be an astronaut while I was still at SpaceX. And NASA astronauts, there's like the typical list of things on the resume, and the first screening is just like a machine learning of what's on there. And one of the hits there is scuba diving. So I got the rating for that purpose, but then ended up really liking it. It's like a whole nother world down there that I never really realized existed. So it actually tickles the exploration itch as well. Like, you think it's just, you're going to see sand and stuff, but if you go to cool places, you see an entire world in a different, it looks like you're on an alien planet, quite frankly. So it turned out to be really cool. But no, I think that would be really neat though. And I think to like get the air, land, and sea, I've got to drive, out of it and then go and be able to use all 3 state licenses, modes of transport. I think that would be pretty cool, but I'll save that one for the bucket list.
beyond being a 007 James Bond in the making, someone who's crazy about doing ridiculous shit, what are some values or principles that you live by and that have helped you? Try to keep it succinct and short, because I think it tells a lot about a person.
Sure. I call them, in quotes, dad values. I don't know if that actually means a thing, but it's basic. It's basically like, and this goes back to the leadership aspect where, I don't have as much clout as most other CEOs. And so to compensate, you just got to suck it up and do like what you truly believe is the right thing, build the trust, show up every day, set the other person up for success, and be like, shit, I'm not going to, be a great leader tomorrow. That option just does not exist. And so you just suck it up. You take the long road and you just do like everyday right things. And that's kind of the value system that I try to bring to the company.
Beautiful. And last question, something we ask every guest is, what is a book that has changed your worldview, or you could call your favorite book? It could be in any genre, fiction, non-fiction, or you can mention 3 books. It could be 1 book, 2 or 3 books. But what are some of your favorites?
I'll rattle off a few that are pretty cool. Actually, I love this question too. Like, everyone asks it, but it's really an important question because it kind of defines the way you're thinking. So, I love this one. Let's see. So, A Brief History of Time is why I wanted to major in physics. So I read that while I was touring campuses. I think the best book on marketing is Positioning. I think the best book on how your brain works is Thinking Fast and Slow. I think the best book on negotiation is Never Split the Difference and The Skilled Negotiator. I think the best the best book on mathematical physics is, I think it's actually called Mathematical Physics by Bruce Cussey. Let's see, what are some other good ones? Of course, a shout out, my girlfriend's book, 11 Paper Hearts. Couldn't put it down. Absolutely loved it. Highly recommend, shameless plug, but it is also.
What is your girlfriend's name? What's your girlfriend's
name? Kelsey Horton.
Okay, we're gonna throw the book up on the screen if you're watching. If you're watching on YouTube. Will, it's been an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed this conversation. We're going to have to come out next time we're on the West Coast. We're going to have to come out and see you and Varda as well. But thanks for this. Really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This was certainly a fun hour, and hope to meet you guys in person someday.
For sure.
Cheers, Will. Thank you.